Littlemore is a good presenter with a suitably detached approach.
David McNichol, The Bulletin.
Infuriating, if not laughable.
David McNichol, The Bulletin.
Insufferably sanctimonious, a particularly arrogant style about him.
The Age Green Guide.
I think Media Watch is a wank, and I think it's self-indulgent. It's supercilious.
Ray Martin, The Entertainer.
That's what they think. Good evening. Tonight marks the 100th edition of Media Watch, so we've gone back through those 3 years of programmes to review the journalistic issues we've been concerned with. And right from the first programme, they've included checkbook journalism.
You're a strong man, Mr. Finch. Why be pressured into a confession for a crime you say you never committed?
Because they were talking about big money.
Sydney footballer Paul Hayward has returned to Australia after 10 years in a Bangkok jail to rekindle the checkbook journalism conflagration. To a greater or lesser degree, all our media pay criminals or their families for exclusive stories.
I'm not responsible for decisions that are made in network newsrooms around this country, but if a financial deal has been made or is made between this network and the Haywards, I want no part of it.
The real point is that the story is valid, needs telling, with or without money.
This is what they got.
All right, I could have given names to people, but when people asked me for names, I told them the truth because the photos they showed me, I didn't know them.
Hardly value for money.
Paul Hayward, you can go to hell. I'm Darren Hitch.
We know. We know.
Extremely sexually compatible. Aren't you with someone you're going to marry? Have to talk to him first. If you wanted to, yeah, I think we'd come to some talks and, yeah, wouldn't have a big spectacular wedding in Venice, though.
But you would still marry him?
Yeah, why not? He's a decent guy. We love each other. You know, he says he loves me. I love him.
A security operation was put on full alert as the man who survived 43 days lost in the Himalayas was offloaded.
The blanket wasn't to protect his privacy, but the $250,000 reportedly paid by Kerry Packer and Conrad Black to share the exclusive story.
Harry M. Miller.
Everybody's very interested. We just sort of calm it a bit on the harassment side.
The Sydney Aboriginal community was outraged yesterday at the fatal shooting of an unarmed Aboriginal during a police raid.
Did the Herald reporter really mean to say that only Aborigines were outraged? And was the killing of such little significance that it merited only a single column? Even in death, the black victim didn't rate the courtesy of Mr. Gundy.
Claiming it will never get to the bottom of Gundy's death.
Suggesting Gundy was shot after challenging police.
You see what we mean?
Can you understand that some Australians, possibly many Australians, couldn't give a damn about the arguments within your church that go back thousands of years and back into the arcane arguments of the Middle East? Well, and we don't want them on the streets of Australia or Sydney either.
I mean, you're an Aboriginal boy and you just decide to become a policeman. I mean, there couldn't have been anything tougher, mate.
Yeah, well, I'm not an Aboriginal, Gibbo. I'm a South Sea Islander, and I'm sort of proud of the fact that I am.
Nine's Eye on Australia, journalism as entertainment, plumbed new depths in the invasion of privacy by snatching and sifting through the garbage tins of prominent people, including publisher Ita Buttrose.
And in this street lives one of Australia's most famous women, and her name is Ita Buttrose.
This indicates, again, possibly someone who is particularly style conscious.
Channel 9 makes you grateful your house is on the sewer, doesn't it?
Oh, yes.
I want to ask you about an experience back in the Vietnam days.
Do you? What do you want to know about?
Nui Dat, a young Vietnamese girl and some water torture.
Who are you?
I'm Peter Wilkinson from Channel 9.
Mr. Skates, Mark Llewellyn from A Current Affair, Channel 9 Australia. Wonder if you'd have time to have a few words to us. Possible that you might be able to talk to us, answer a few questions.
I don't say to you.
We're not trespassing, we're on a street.
Yeah, but what are you taking photos of him for? What's he done?
He chose to come out and talk to us.
He didn't have much choice. You got him out to see what was going on. Take that thing off. No, Charlie.
Calm down. Calm down.
Reconciliation between China and the Soviet Union, intended as a PR triumph for the Beijing leadership, turned into a major embarrassment as Chinese students and workers exploited the foreign media presence and took to the streets.
The surprise visit was made at 5 o'clock this morning.
The hospital visit by Zhao Ziyong and Li Peng was a show of concern for the hunger strikers.
Mike Barrett reporting from the Asian Bureau for 10 News.
But he wasn't there. It's an old trick. Use the satellite pictures, mix them with your own reporter's piece to camera, and pass the whole thing off as our man on the scene. Mr. Barrett was almost in China, Hong Kong, to be truthful. In his 12th of August column, Jones gave us the benefit of his views on the crisis in Kuwait.
Even if America started now with a crash program, massive investment and big-scale federal incentives, it would take 10 years to rebuild the human...
Something funny there. Who are these sources with the devastating revelations? Well, actually, there's only one. This man. You'll recognise him as Freddie Forsyth, author of many best-selling works of fiction.
Even if America started now with a crash program, massive investment and big-scale federal incentives, it would take 10 years to rebuild...
So far, these issues have arisen in a war that's been fought almost entirely with American air power. But should a huge ground war develop with infinitely more carnage, then the issue of what to show and how to show it will become infinitely more painful.
So far, these issues have arisen in a war that's been fought almost entirely using Allied air power. But if a huge ground battle develops with infinitely more casualties, what to show, how much to show, and how to show it is going to pose a whole new set of problems for Australian broadcasters.
Howard Gibbs reporting.
No, he wasn't, Jana.
Well, a short while ago, I spoke to John Lombard, and I asked him whether he thinks people power can triumph in the Soviet Union.
It's largely symbolic at the moment because the numbers are really quite small.
And a short time ago, we asked John Lombard if he thought people power could triumph in the Soviet Union, as it had in so many other countries.
Numbers are really quite small, but the significant thing is that it has been enormously effective here outside the Russian parliament.
A short time ago, I spoke to John Lombard in Moscow and asked him whether he thought people power could triumph in the Soviet Union.
It's largely symbolic at the moment because the numbers are really quite small. But the significant thing is that it has been enormously effective here outside the Russian parliament.
Our Soviet correspondent is still with us.
No, he wasn't.
John, do you think Soviet people power can triumph in the Soviet Union?
The significant thing is that it has been enormously effective here outside the Russian parliament.
Let me make this plain. I'm not criticising the newsreaders. They did what was required of them. It's the newsroom journos who are at fault, faking up interviews and devaluing the work of the men and women in the field.
The snag
catch
is that while there is no obviously compelling reasons to sell at the moment, there is a dearth of good news on which to buy.
Next, a different kind of bad press. Some poor quality reporting on the Bond Corp attempt to flog off 49% of the West Australian to Robert Maxwell.
Alan Bond has sold nearly half of his Perth morning paper, the West Australian.
He hadn't, of course.
The British press baron Robert Maxwell has acquired a 49% holding in your major newspaper in Perth.
Has acquired or is threatening to acquire?
I understand has acquired.
Wrong again. The news that Keating and Hawke had kiboshed the proposal was yet another example of the fact that a journalist's mistake is never a mistake, it's just another story.
The federal government has stepped in to prevent British publisher Robert Maxwell taking a further stake in Perth's West Australian newspaper.
I'm not so bothered myself about foreign ownership as such. It raises a great bogey. What I'm really bothered about is ownership by tycoons who put their other business interests first and use their newspapers to some way further their business interests and distort the coverage as a result.
Mr. Fairfax has joined forces with Dr. Tony O'Reilly to bid for the John Fairfax Group, competing with Consolidated Press, Jamison Equity, and the current favourite, Australian Independent Newspapers. But as the pie charts drawn up by The Age show, whoever gets it, Australia remains with three huge media bosses.
The Terang Consortium is the only consortium that makes that likely, that increased concentration in your eyes. So it is really, in effect, a direct attack on Mr. Packer, isn't it?
Because he is already a significant media owner in this country.
So I come back to my question. You simply don't believe his assurances, do you? The perception is that you can dial the Prime Minister and get through in a flash. Is that influence, and do you have it?
I don't know. I've never tried to dial him.
We're thinking about taking him on as a sort of a quiz master and a quiz show. It's going to be spin the wheel or I'll break your leg with Kerry. Just joking, Kerry. No defamation.
You never know, Dennis. You better be careful about that.
The 10 network has repackaged itself yet again, lowering its sights still further to shoot for ratings. Foreign cameras were barred from the PR-free lunch, where the 1989 image was unveiled by new boss, Mr. Shanks from America.
Look what's going on around here.
The secret of power dressing for men, we can reveal, is one particular tie.
Our top story this morning is the pilot strike.
Weaving away from the most powerful punches ever.
Of my experience, to fall into the
Stormy seas ahead for yachting's elite after a US court.
However, the police minister and the premier are uniform in both.
George, well done. Well, Maxie, it's been another hard day.
In reply, while Murray said he had no recollection.
Only one team to turn to, rampaging Roy Slaven.
Airlines, hotels, car rental companies are all
Clydesdales, haven't they got great big feet?
Because he's a dedicated follower of fashion. And when he does...
Then there was trial by media, which, with its attendant push for cameras in courtrooms, is much more of a threat to the rule of law than it is a part of the right to know.
What has he got in his hat? What did you do? I just stood there. How long was it? 100 years, it seemed like.
Lawyers and senior police have said Paul Mason has no chance of a fair trial following the flouting of contempt laws by police and some sections of the media.
Neither police nor reporters attempted to avoid prejudice. Their inappropriately cooperative relationship resulted in a media circus at the crime scenes, in disclosure outside court of confessional statements, and in public assertions by the police of the man's guilt. Sydney's Channel 7 was gratuitously offensive about the arrested man's father and his entirely justified reaction.
Mason's father, Alan, left the court hurriedly with a curt word to reporters.
Bit of decency, please.
We don't do it to you, and you make a conscious effort. You're the worst offender, mate.
You don't even know what you're taking one by one.
What will do?
The other hand? Have I? That's not how I've got it, that's my thumb.
Through my eyes, Lindy's persuasive story.
Sorry about the mix-up, it was well worth it.
Yes, it was worth it. And you're looking good too, which is nice.
And we were trying to find you this morning, but you didn't seem to be answering your phone, and we were saying, where is the man? And you were madly ringing around looking for us, and we're sorry, we were there.
But you're looking good, which is important.
Okay.
Okay, we'll catch up, Lindy. All the best.
Bye.
In 1982, Coca-Cola bought 49% of Columbia Pictures and began at once to plug its own products in its own movies. These latter-day plugs for Coca-Cola, for example, work as subliminal inducements because their context is ostensibly a movie, not an ad.
Pepsi's response has been to appoint a special manager who has successfully negotiated a role for Pepsi in such films as Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Flashdance, Stand and Deliver,
Not Johnny, man.
and Cocoon: The Return. A day out on Thursday for the Canberra Gallery to witness the launch of Labor's election campaign on the poisoned waters of two mighty rivers. It was a somewhat stage-managed event.
Only the economy attracts more voter concern than the environment, according to the polls. So today, the Prime Minister came to the Murray-Darling Basin, one of the nation's most environmentally ravaged regions, accompanied, of course, by a battalion of reporters.
15 seconds to the media bus.
It's not right, is it?
Hey, Mr. Bob, Angus, tell me something. You know, we've got a few little economic problems at the moment. When's the country going to be all right?
A couple of days.
Definite 4 kills.
In the steaming jungles of our far north, the Bronze Anzacs seek answers to the questions we'll have to face if the enemy comes. Can the Defence Minister squeeze his tremendous bulk into the turret of a Leopard tank?
Oh, what do you got, mate?
You might just... So what have we got? This is a pair of silk pyjamas for you. John Howard is back centre stage, and to make sure no one misses the news, he's in the midst of a marathon round of media appearances. Turn on a television set or the radio, almost at random today, and there's Mr. Howard.
From Outstand back to John Howard, for what it's worth, I don't believe John Howard is doing his best for the Liberal Party to win the election.
Well, that's garbage.
That's garbage? All right, well, fair enough. You'd know about it because you've handled plenty of garbage in your life.
Power. Good works. Bob Hawke. A pal.
Mates. Bob Hawke and the Cougars.
This is a man of many mansions. Many mansions, if I can use the biblical phrase. No,
you had a place in Melbourne with a tennis court and swimming pool. You didn't listen to
Wait a minute, let me finish. I mean, you haven't had this habit of interruption before.
Sharper than a serpent's tooth, a Prime Minister thinks aloud.
If I were a state premier...
You're the Prime Minister, Bob.
Mates no more. Don't presume this network's behind you. You're a loser. But you're still Bob. That's something. The choice of newspaper photographs is the unacknowledged editorial comment that has an almost subliminal effect on readers. The stuff I'm talking about is the day-to-day depiction of, say, the Prime Minister, in a roundup of electoral crises, shown as a beaten man, hands up in surrender. With the leap in unemployment, tired, lined and talking, not listening. His parliamentary leadership at issue and portrayed as snarling.
I wouldn't want any sort of suggestion from you or anyone in the media how I conduct my affairs with the media. Thank you very much. None at all.
Some of the senior ALP figures seem to say it's disgusting.
You don't want to believe all you read in the press, my friend.
Journo-political relationships, media racism, invasions of privacy as entertainment, infotainment, advertorials, plagiarism, demagoguery and ever-shrinking mass media ownership. The things that have concerned us, quite apart from everyday journalistic standards, continue apace and unabated. So we'll be back next week with more of the same. But we'll leave the last word to them. It's good night from us.
And people who do media watch, you know, these little people who want to investigate the rest of the world, the only way they're ever going to make a name for themselves is by using people who have made a name like me.
An impressive 15 minutes of television.
John Law's TV Week.
Littlemore often gives indications of being more intelligent than he looks.
Frank Devine, the Australian.
He currently hosts the controversial program Media Watch. Would you please welcome Stuart Littlemore?
Hello and welcome to Media Witch Hunt. Well, yet again we feature those watchdogs of public morality, Ms. Wendt and the execrable Hinch.